Hey, what's up? Well, I know it's kind of soon to be making a video, so perhaps I'll space this one out um, to happen on a more futuristic date. I'm still wearing my same shirt. This is not a new shirt, but I like it nonetheless. Need to get some more variety in my clothing. And I want to make this like a part two of the video that I made last time where, let's see, um, I read these questions. I like to read these dream interpretations from Meta AI. I mean, that's just so amazing. I mean, if only they could have had something like that a few years back. Um, now a lot of my dreams are silly. The themes of them are not something I'm exactly proud of, but um, if only they could have had a dream interpretation like this, it would have been awesome. Okay, so I'd like to read this question. I would like to record my dream exactly 1 month past Christmas. I dreamed my dad got me a new phone and telescope without getting rid of my old ones. The weirdest part was that I put said telescope in a grassy rural area near a railroad track and was able to rig up the phone so it could watch the moon through it at all times, with an app like ADT having been installed on my new phone. That, of course, doesn't make any sense because it needs to be constantly repositioned as the moon gradually rises and sets. A phone must also have a charger at all times, especially if it's old, but somehow, on a cold, rainy night, it occurred to me that someone might steal these things. So I demanded he drive me to the area in his truck. I woke up after he reluctantly agreed, riding in his truck to see if they were there. I felt so grateful that this was just a dream and that my one and only telescope was still disassembled in its bag. My biggest problem of the day being the fact that the clouds made my full moon impossible to view. That's bad, but not nearly as bad as would be the nonsensical scenario described above. What does this dream mean? And they said, dreams can be quite fascinating and symbolic. While dream interpretations are subjective, I can offer some insights based on common themes and symbolism. Gift of phone and telescope. Your dad's gift might represent guidance, support, or a new perspective. Old and new coexisting. This could symbolize balancing past experiences with new opportunities. Telescope in rural area. This might represent exploration, growth, and expansion. Moon observation. The moon often symbolizes emotions, intuition, and cycles. Fear of theft. Okay, now this was around the time when I didn't think Superman was coming in because I thought someone had stolen my package. This could indicate anxiety about losing something valuable or feeling vulnerable. Yes. Demanding your dad's help. This might suggest seeking support or security from a trusted figure. Relief upon waking. The comfort of realizing it was just a dream. Remember, dreams are personal and can be unique to your experiences and emotions. Take what resonates and consider exploring your own association with these symbols to better understand your subconscious mind. Well, another thing, the fact that it's near a railroad track has to do with me hearing that train in the distance, and a lot of times when you hear a train in real life, you'll often see trains in your dream. You know what I'm saying? It's like your ears are still hearing, they're still picking up the sounds of the real world, but because your eyes are closed, your mind is creating a different narrative around those sounds. You know what I'm saying? Just like the high school practicing, the band and the cheerleading and all that down the street. My brain is recreating the memories of my own high school days based on the sounds of the current high school kids. You know what I'm saying? And so that's happening with these dreams. I'm seeing railroad tracks and trains, you know, And my mind is creating all kinds of stories around them because I actually hear a train. And so, the fear of theft, that is so true because, as I've stated before, I thought someone had stolen my Superman. And I was very distraught about that throughout the whole month of January. Then February rolls around and it's happily ever after. But then, of course, I get sick right before Mardi Gras. So it'll be a winter to remember. I like to say December to remember, at the end of every year. But, what I want to talk about in this video, well, I kind of want to, one thing I forgot to mention about that fire that I still remember to this day. In addition to everything else, like, that god awful smell, the burnt smell. I can remember, yeah, I shouldn't have done this, but almost every day, at least once a day, I would walk to and from. I would make that walk all the way to, way across the complex to that burned down apartment because all my life, every time there was ever a fire, from the time I was little, and that's part of the reason I'm so scared of fire, is because, like I've stated before, the more you think about something, the more it dominates your life. But my whole life, every time something would burn down, I would become fascinated with that building. Didn't matter if it was a home or a restaurant or what it was, I was just fascinated with it because it had burned down. And I was just so fascinated with, well, just like being fascinated with death. It's just something, this horrible, macabre thing. Seeing a building that was all black and, just scary. But, I would walk to and from that apartment that burned. And on the first day, I really got my exercise in that day, November the 9th. And one thing I remember, and I also happen to be getting over a cold. So, believe it or not, every time I get one, it's like I'm reminded of that. And that didn't really help me, with that phlegm, that lingering phlegm cough. And so, I walked all the way back over there because, the firemen did not leave until noon that day. And I can remember the heat just resonating from that building, even though the fire had been put out. There was water everywhere, like as if they'd had a flooding rain from the fire hose. And, it was like, it took forever to actually get to the building, because when it was burning, it was easy to find it because you saw that big old plume of orange smoke. But it took me forever, to get there or to find my way back to that building. But oh my gosh, when I finally did arrive at the building, oh God, that heat just, for the month of November, it was just so god awful, that heat. It felt worse than summertime. You know what I'm saying? Because it's normal to feel that kind of heat somewhat in the summer, but it was just like, and I'm talking about like you could feel it from the surrounding apartments. This heat. And that's one thing I hate about apartments. It's like everybody's just living on top of each other. And it's just it's horrible. And why my dad sees that as such an improvement over living in a house and, having it. Well, he's a lazy ass. That's why, because he's lazy. Anything besides his job, he couldn't give a crap less about. And now that he doesn't have his job, he doesn't have much to care, He'll go practically a week without showering, which is gross. And so, but it's just so infuriating, to have to live with someone who thinks that it's better to risk, your whole, like everything you've ever had in your life burning up in an apartment because you live with at least 8 other tenants, as opposed to taking care of a house and trying to maintain it yourself. You know what I'm saying? I've asked him why he likes living in an apartment. And he says, well, when something breaks, you just call maintenance, and there is value in that. Oh, it's just so infuriating. Um, but it's just it just really makes me mad because it's like, when you live in the problem with living in an apartment. Well, I mean, it's like if you live in a house, just imagine if everyone on your street was all living with you in one big building. That's what an apartment is. It's like your neighbors are in the same building as you are. And that, why that is acceptable, why so many people are willing to live like that is something I will never understand. Why apartments are such a popular way to live, especially big apartments like that. I mean, we're talking about a complex that had thousands of people easily between those security gates. And each apartment in that area was like that. Like there's nothing comparable in this area, and that's what I love about it. There are apartment complexes, but not a one of them is as big as that one. Um, but why so many people are just and ours wasn't even the biggest one in the area. I mean, you had 3 and 4 story complexes where, I mean, there were even higher floors than the second floor. And what I learned from that fire is, well, I always knew this, but I mean, the higher the floor, the more dangerous it is in case of a fire, because it's harder to escape and because heat rises. Okay, so yeah, it burns upward, like it burns from the top down usually. And you know, so why so many people are just willing to live on the second, third, or fourth, or even higher floor, to live in a big city, and I will never understand. And I mean, if there ever was a maternal bone in my body, any desire to have kids whatsoever, the very idea, just the idea of living with those kids in an apartment, on the second floor or higher, is just, I mean, it's enough to zap that. I mean, it's enough to just kill any maternal desire I might ever have, for a baby. Any wish I could ever have to have a baby would be killed by the thought of being a single mom, or even with a partner, it wouldn't matter. Living in an apartment, having to climb stairs or take an elevator of sorts, and knowing that, you know, I mean, yes, you could request the ground floor, I guess, but that limits your options even more. Um, so yeah, and luckily we were on the ground floor. I think my dad requested that, knowing that I would never go live with him if he wasn't. You know what I'm saying? Because in my case, it wasn't so much the fire; it was a fear of me getting hurt on the stairs in the rain. You know what I'm saying? I mean, when it's pouring down rain, and I mean, it's hard enough to get groceries from the parking lot to a ground floor apartment, without living upstairs. Um, so, and in the coldness, I mean, the last thing you want to do is have to put your hands on an ice cold railing. But it's just not a good way to live. I mean, it's not. It really isn't. I mean, I don't even want a pet to have to live in a stupid apartment. Because I mean, while no one was killed in that fire, there were some animals that died. Because unlike a human, you just can't reason with an animal to get out of the building. It's on fire. They think hiding under the bed is what they should do, and then the smoke kills them. Well, hopefully they die of the smoke and not the fire. Um, but yeah, it's just terrible, because I mean, an animal's intelligence will never be that of a human, and so they don't understand what to do. They can't take fire safety class at school. Um, so, you know, it just it's just all around bad. Living in an apartment, it's just a terrible way to live. And there's just it's a little known fact that nothing um kills a woman's desire to have babies like a big city. There's nothing like a big city to just kill your sex drive, especially as a woman, knowing that you'll be responsible for those kids and you have to give birth to them. And it's just terrible all around. And it's like, I just will never understand, why that was okay with him to live there, to live in. Well, he lived in 2 apartments after leaving my mom. I will never understand how my mom was worse than what you have to endure living in an apartment. I will never understand that. What was so bad about my mom? The best person to ever come into his life, basically. the mother of his only 2 children, to my knowledge. What was so bad about her that living in an apartment, and the first one he had was upstairs, but that was before I lived with him, and I think he knew I would never want to move to that with him permanently. What was so great about an upstairs 1-bed apartment at first, and then the ground floor 2-bed apartment with me, what's so great, why was my mom so terrible of a person that was preferable? You know what I'm saying? And by the way, a 1-bed is more likely to burn down simply because they can fit more units in a building, plain and simple. I mean, just think about it. It's basically a huge building with the same number of kitchens. It's like one building with 8 kitchens, basically, and imagine 8 central heatings. And everything that can cause a house to burn down multiplied by the number of units. So it is just a bad situation. And the fewer bedrooms you have, the more units you can have in a building. So we were in the 2-bed complexes, like the other side of the complex, and we had basically 8 units in our building, like a cube. And so it's just really bad. And why people live in them, why people like them. I mean, you just the worst thing about it is, like, you have no control. You have absolutely no control over who is your neighbor at an apartment. And the other thing is, I mean, let's say you did move to an apartment where you kind of like the neighbors and you kind of even make friends with them, let's say. Let's say, it just happens to be a complex with like-minded people. Well, guess what? They move so rapidly. People in an apartment are often in a transitory state of living. They're in an apartment because they haven't yet built a house or decided they want to live in a place permanently. It's often a temporary thing. And so, your neighbors change all the time. And so even if, like, let's say you lived in a building with all white people, where everyone has approximately the same skin tone as you, which unfortunately I was normally the lightest skinned person in the building, and no one had blue eyes on a typical day. So, I mean, you could live with all white people one day, and then, eventually they're going to move out, and somebody's going to replace them who may not be white. You know what I'm saying? So you never can even get used to who the neighbors are, let alone decide who lives there, who doesn't. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, and when you live in such a crappy apartment, I mean, you get put with, well, the lowest common denominator. You know what I'm saying? Whoever can't afford to do better than an apartment like that. And I know that sounds racist or whatever, but it's just, I just didn't like it. I hated it, because it's like half the people were not even native to the English language. And a lot of the adults, I don't really think of myself as an adult. A lot of these parents, sometimes the oldest person living, the oldest tenant in the unit of a lot of these places was younger than me, and maybe even younger than my baby sister. So we're talking about, like, people half my age being the head of some of these households and having young children. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you may not have a toddler in daycare and have them screaming all the time. But, if your upstairs neighbor does, I mean, that's going to cut down on your sleep too. And it might even, I mean, I still was only getting about one cold per year. But I mean, if they touch something and then you happen to touch it, well, guess what? You've got your cold of the year, and you'll never know why. You know what I'm saying? It's just a bad situation. And one thing I want to end with, I wanted to talk more about this, but I was researching these dolls, and these are called. It's a Fishel, Fishel doll, and it's called the Flippin' Flop Cheerleader. And they didn't have that much variation, but I might have to take them out, even though I don't like doing that. Fishel, Fishel, and there was a blonde and a lighter red head, and they all pretty much had blue eyes. But the thing about those dolls is they were kind of a knockoff on this. These are called Playground Kids. And the reason I'm reminded of these dolls is because I think this came in around the time of the fire. Sometime in that date range, November of 21, this doll came in, or I ordered her, and her name I found out is Abigail or Abby. And what makes her special is she has blonde hair and brown eyes, which is probably the rarest combination. I mean, it is hard to find blonde hair and brown eyes, as well as red hair and brown eyes. Usually the only brown-eyed dolls are the black doll, or and that's incredibly insulting, to a white person with brown eyes. But it's like they make everybody else light-eyed, because they think that sells better, blue or green eyes. And the reason I started collecting these soft body vinyl face dolls is because I had bought this Archie doll. And I figured if I'm gonna, be open to having dolls like this, at first I thought this was the only kind of Archie I would ever get. I had, Betty, Veronica, and is it Jughead? Yeah, in a different type. And eventually I found an Archie like them, but at first I only got this one because I thought he'd be the only one I'd ever get. And I liked him because he's like a little boy. But I figured he could go with these girls. And and I wanted to talk about these Playground Kids, which, it's one of the many dolls of the early 90s that I never had. Because as an actual little girl, it's the saddest thing. I would walk right past the pink aisle at Walmart, and, hardly ever went to Toys R Us because that was, out of my mom's price range. And Target, hardly ever went there. But it's like I didn't even care about girl toys when I was an actual little girl, because so few of them had a hairdo like mine. And that's why, I mean, as I've stated before, you could have a dozen dolls, and the one and only boy out of a dozen was the one and only doll I cared to have. And so yeah, it's like I was just fascinated by everything except girl stuff. You know what I'm saying? Guns, balls, weapons of all kinds. That's what I was fascinated with, not girl stuff, when I was an actual child. And now that I'm an adult, you see, I'm looking back and finding that I've missed out on this whole other pink aspect of childhood. You know what I'm saying? It's like I was never an actual little girl, but then also wasn't a boy for obvious reasons. But I was researching these Playground Kids, and I found that, just like so many dolls, they were almost exclusively girls. But except there was this one token boy. And today, because they're branded, they can go anywhere. They can go for anything from about $30 to $50 if they're a girl. But get this, the one token boy named Ricky, he has like brown hair and blue eyes, kind of like a My Buddy doll, you know, kind of just like a girl with an ugly short haircut. Um, he can go for anywhere from $30 to $100 in mint condition. Like we're talking triple digits where he mint in box. And it's ridiculous, you know, just, I mean, personally, if it were that important for me to have a boy version, which it's not, I'd rather just get a girl and maybe flock her hair or cut it short or something. But obviously, I'm not going to do that, you know, since I have my Archie, little Archie. Um, so, you know, I mean, that's just ridiculous, you know, for a doll that's not even a sculpted head boy, you know, because I prefer this kind of boy with the molded hair, um, you know, because that way it doesn't just look like a girl with a haircut. But I mean, that's ridiculous, you know, for just a ugly short-haired girl called Ricky, you know, and he's got like a jersey that says 88. And he's the only one with freckles and no eyelashes, which is kind of insulting. It's like saying boys are allowed to be imperfect, but you know, girls have to have eyelashes at every stage of their lifespan. So you know, I mean that's probably why they just pretty much stopped making boy dolls. And they certainly don't in the cheaper knockoffs. You know, knockoffs rarely have a boy. Um, you know, probably because of that, because they don't want to have to explain to children, you know, what makes him a boy doll and why he's different from the girls in the few ways that he is. So, yeah, I guess this video is way too long and I'll go ahead and post it.